When the Austrian Cultural Forum asked if I would say a few words after the film about my research, I was of course honored by the request and delighted to accept. But I also found myself pondering precisely what to discuss. The film hopefully speaks for itself, and ultimately the fruit of that research is what you just saw. I didn't want to retread in words what had been evoked in sight and sound. What I decided I would do, though, is take this opportunity to discuss something that I've always wished we had more opportunities to hear filmmakers talk about, namely what's not in the film. Most film editing, I think, can be seen as an example of what in literature is called synecdoche, meaning that a part is used as a representation of a larger whole. Generally speaking, what we see in a film, certainly in a documentary, can be considered emblematic, the tip of the iceberg, pardon the pun. Symbolic of larger forces or of a larger mass of similar information. And that's definitely the case with this film. The presenting network, SVT, wanted an hour-long film, and there was clearly a great deal that couldn't be adequately dealt with in that time frame, especially as what I was really trying to construct was an experience, a story that had an emotional rhythm, could hopefully take viewers on a journey that sped up, slowed down, much as Berg's Lyric Suite does, that had empathy for all the characters, and that hopefully did not require any specialized musical knowledge to feel a part of. So what that meant is that a lot of what I found in my research, and I do have a passion for research, so that's, I think, probably been an asset for this and other documentaries that I've made. But most of what I found had to be left on the proverbial cutting room floor, because when it comes to the topic of Alban Berg and his secrets, there's enough material for a miniseries. And while I'm certainly satisfied with the choices I made in the film, I wanted to give you some other examples of what I learned about this most seductively cryptic of modernist composers. First, because I enjoy speaking about it, and second, because I do think that it helps further flesh out and support the argument made in the film about Berg. Berg was clearly quite enamored with the act and indeed the art of keeping secrets, both in his life and in his work. But what's really stands out to me about that is that he liked keeping his secrets very close to the surface, where they're almost discoverable, and yet he gets away with it. You can almost imagine Berg, and clearly I'm being facetious here, as someone who loves shoplifting and takes a certain delight in hiding the article he's just stolen as he has an in-depth discussion with the shop owner on his way to the exit. Just in the same way that he clearly got a certain pleasure out of carrying out an extramarital affair with Hanna Fuchs-Robetin in her house under her husband's eyes, and then carrying out a very warm correspondence with that husband as though nothing unusual had transpired. In other words, he's sort of a Tom Ripley-like personality. He likes committing the perfect crime, and the getaway is as important to him, and perhaps even as pleasurable to him as what happens immediately prior. He was proud of his secrets and his skill at keeping them, just as proud as he was of his skill as a composer. Often those two skills were one and the same thing. And I do have a feeling then, as the scholar Chris Walton says in the film, that Berg fully intended and maybe even hoped that all of this content would one day come to light and be discovered. Maybe not by the people immediately around him in his orbit and in his house, but by the people that I think any real artist might care about the most, posterity, the public of the future. There were at least a couple of occasions when I was researching this film when I had the admittedly partly irrational sense that Berg had personally laid out a trail of breadcrumbs for me to follow. Not me specifically, but someone who was one day going to make a film like the one that indeed I was making. That's why there's a shot towards the end of Secret Song where Andrew Szymanski, the wonderful artist portraying Berg, is shown declaiming one of Berg's letters on a film set, our film set, complete with lights and other camera equipment around. My intuition about this was confirmed a couple of years ago. I'd been in contact with an extremely gracious librarian from McGill University's music library, David Curtis. And when I mentioned that I'd recently made a film about Berg's Lyric Suite, he wasted no time in telling me about another annotated score of the Lyric Suite, much less well known than the one that Berg gave Hannah, which Berg wrote out for a pupil of his named Julius Schloss, and which is now housed in the McGill collection. David invited me to see the score the next time I was in Montreal, which by coincidence was shortly afterwards for a screening and discussion of another film of mine. Julius Schloss was a student of Berg's who found himself not only being assigned composition exercises, but the task of helping to manage his teacher's private affairs, much like Theodor Adorno, who's featured in the film. On the left, we can see a telegram from Berg to Schloss that I found in the McGill archive. The English translation is roughly, "Home already, Tuesday evening, discretion, Berg." That gives you a certain flavor of what these student-teacher relationships, which were almost like medieval apprenticeships in their subordination and sense of personal loyalty from apprentice to master, what they consisted of, and certainly what they consisted of with both Adorno and Schloss. Schloss, who was Jewish, fled to Shanghai in 1938 after being briefly interned by the Nazis at Dachau. On the right is his official Chinese ID picture from those years. And one of the things that he took with him into exile, and which was later bequeathed to McGill, was this score of the Lyric Suite, which Berg had fully fleshed out in annotations for him. It's not annotated in colored pencil, as was the score for Hannah, which formed the basis of my film, but it includes almost all the same information. The A, B, and HF initials, the names of the characters, specific scenes, dates, places, the words of the Baudelaire poem, and all else. In other words, these annotations weren't just some grand romantic gesture meant only for the eyes of the woman Berg loved, although I'm sure Berg wished Hannah to think that. This is not the ending of the movie Titanic, where Rose has been holding on to the precious necklace all this time and then drops it into the ocean and no one ever knew she had it. This was something much more calculated on Berg's part, a kind of slow-release information capsule meant for the history books and perhaps even meant for the cinema, as Berg was a major film buff. Done in a way that suggests that Berg was proud of his achievement in musical tone painting and really wanted the secret to one day come out. I think he knew that many listeners considered his music difficult, that it was written in a modernist idiom that was often tough to crack, and he felt that a tantalizing storyline would make his music more palatable. And he was right. Knowing about this scandalous backstory has certainly inflated both the popularity and the comprehensibility of the Lyric Suite, which is all to the good because it is truly a masterpiece. One of the greatest compliments I've ever received in my professional life happened last year from Maestro Gianandrea Nozeda, who had just given a wonderful concert with the National Symphony Orchestra at Carnegie Hall, including Berg's string orchestral arrangement of the Lyric Suite. It turned out that Maestro Nozeda had seen Secret Song, and he told me that watching the film had illuminated the inner drama of the music for him, which in turn helped inspire his performance and his interpretation. So Berg was right. Interestingly enough, the score for Schloss contains also some additional information that's not in the score he gave Hannah. For instance, Berg writes out the words of not only Baudelaire's De Profundis Clamavi, the poem used in the sixth movement, but another Baudelaire poem, Autumn Sonnet, as you can see on the right. Is it possible that not only the sixth movement of the Lyric Suite, but also another movement, perhaps the fifth, is, or at what point was, conceived as a secret song? As tantalizing as all this is, and it is, the truth is that it was nothing new for Berg, because Berg started keeping secrets early. When Berg was 17, he fathered an illegitimate child, a daughter, with a woman who worked in the Berg household, Marie Scheuchel. Here you can see Marie serving the Berg family at their table. There, Berg and Marie are at the far right of this photo, which was taken the year that they became lovers. This kind of situation was not at all uncommon in well-to-do Viennese households at the time, among the bourgeois and the aristocracy, and the Berg family was both bourgeois and minor aristocrats in Austria. Often the son of the family was winkingly encouraged to pursue his sexual initiation with one of the female servants. And that appears to be what happened here. The daughter whom Marie gave birth to was named Albine, an unusual first name that I think nods fairly clearly to the identity of the father, Alban. After a year, Berg legally acknowledged his paternity of the child. Here are some photos of Albine in both childhood and adulthood. As I think you can see, her physical resemblance to her father is striking. Albina played no public role in Berg's life. Even Helena, his wife of 25 years, almost 25 years, had no idea that her husband had a daughter until after Berg's death. That's quite notable because Helena might have been expected to be on the understanding side of the spectrum. After all, her mother, Helena's mother, was the mistress of none other than the Emperor Franz Josef. And Helena was widely assumed to be, in fact, the illegitimate daughter of the emperor. But Berg chose to keep that information from Helena, kept it from her, but as always with him, kept it close to her. The mother and daughter, Marie and Albina, eventually moved to a house just a few kilometers from the Berg's flat. The middle image here is an aquarelle watercolor portrait that Berg painted of the girl in 1906 or 1907. From this, it seems quite likely that they all saw each other sometimes. Among other things, we know that Berg sent his daughter tickets to the premiere of his opera, Wozzeck. One of the reasons that's poignant, I think, is that Wozzeck's main female character is a woman named Marie. And like Marie Scheuchel, this Marie has a child out of wedlock. In the opera, Marie sings to herself, and I quote, "What will you do now, poor lamb? You have a child, but no man. Hush-a-bye, baby, my darling. Nobody cares about us." So again, hiding in plain sight. Secrets kept spectacularly, unnecessarily, close to the surface. When it comes to the lyric suite, of course, the secret keeping is in a class of its own. My film addresses what I believe are the most important and sensational of these secrets, but there are certainly others. For one thing, there are embedded quotations from other musical works about ill-fated love affairs that help to communicate and indeed advance the plot. We see quotations here from Richard Wagner's great Tristan und Isolde and from Alexander von Zemlinsky's wonderful lyric symphony, which also inspired the lyric suite's title. And there's much, much more. The film mentions that one of the music's secret layers is the use of Alban and Hannah's initials, ABHF. That said, it wasn't only letters, but also numbers that carried semantic weight in this score. At the left here is a letter where Berg tells Hannah that the score is, quote, full of secret references to our numbers, 10 and 23. And at right, you can see what he's talking about. 10 and 23 and their multiples are to be found almost throughout the piece, circled in red in the annotated score. They're everywhere from the number of measures in certain sections to metronome markings, leading to what the wizards of the Emerson String Quartet commented were sometimes almost unplayable metronome markings because he cared about having multiples of 23 or 10, or preferably even both. Now, why is that? Well, numerology was quite fashionable in Vienna at the time, and 23 was a crucial number in the theories of a certain doctor named Wilhelm Fliess, an otorhinolaryngologist. That's what he called himself, because I think it sounds fancier than ear, nose, and throat. Who claimed on somewhat dubious authority that 23 was the natural body rhythmic number of all male animals, both humans and others in the natural kingdom. Berg believed this, and therefore 23 was his number. 10 was Hannah's number because it's the number of letters in Hannah Fuchs. We may have some questions about the airtightness of this logic, but Fliess's theories were all the rage back then. He also claimed, by the way, that he could cure people's sexual neuroses, if they had them, by operating on their noses. Lest we scoff too much at this, we should note that one of the people who thought the world of Fliess back then was none other than the gentleman posing with him in the photograph right behind me, Dr. Sigmund Freud. Indeed, for years, Fliess was one of was Freud's closest friend, and he influenced several of Freud's psychoanalytic theories. Perhaps inevitably, Fliess's reputation eventually took a nosedive. I needed to put in one. Yeah. When he left a piece of gauze in the nasal passage of one of his patients, whom Freud had referred to him during an operation, leaving her face tragically disfigured. Freud then completely expunged Fliess from his official life story in order that his correspondence with Fliess be destroyed, so some secrecy on Freud's part as well. But at the time when the lyric suite was written, Wilhelm Fliess was the epitome of cutting-edge medical respectability, and his impact can be seen and heard in the score. Another influential form of numerology in Vienna at that time was the 12-tone compositional method of Berg's great teacher, Arnold Schoenberg. Numerology was a pressing matter for Schoenberg. Among other things, he had a morbid fear of the number 13. And there's a sense in which Schoenberg's entire 12-tone system can be seen as profoundly numerological, if not also an avoidance mechanism of the number 13. After all, it assigns each of the 12 notes of the chromatic scale a fixed place in the so-called tone row. Schoenberg's radical method had been unveiled in 1923. For the previous 15 years, he'd been writing so-called free atonal music. And his students were expected to faithfully embrace the new system. The lyric suite, which was begun 2 years later, was Berg's first large-scale attempt to do so. But he struggled with it. Berg wrestled with this new construction because I think Berg was really a romantic at heart with both lower and uppercase R's. And I think that one reason he smuggled his secret passion for Hannah into the lyric suite, perhaps even one reason he pursued that passion to begin with, is because following that emotional line made the 12-tone method easier for him to write in, perhaps less mathematical and abstract seeming. And although I've never seen this discussed anywhere, I suspect that next to Helene, the person whose feelings he was most trying to protect by hiding the piece's meaning was Schoenberg. In a 1912 essay, Schoenberg had come out against the idea that music needed to illustrate a text or story in order to have value. So for Berg, his students have to rely on the crutch of an autobiographical love tale and to boot a song setting to write a 12-tone piece I think would have struck Schoenberg as unserious and maybe even personally insulting. So Berg does use the story of his extramarital seduction and the Baudelaire poem. He comes close to flaunting his secret in Schoenberg's face, but then, as always, he erases the fingerprints. Another perfect crime. The last level of secretiveness that I'd like to talk to you about before taking your questions is the very beautiful Schumann-like song that Berg wrote for his wife and dedicated to her when they were young, which you heard a bit of early in my film, Schließe mir die Augen beide, close my eyes with your beloved hands. Those lyrics addressed to Helene are a bit chilling in retrospect when you think about how Berg died, indeed indirectly at Helene's hands. But in this early and rapturously tonal song, you hear the tenderness, contentment, and love that 22-year-old Alban felt for Helene. What I find absolutely fascinating is that when it came time to write the lyric suite, almost 20 years later, Berg was trying, as I mentioned, to make his peace with his teacher's new 12-tone mandate of writing music. And the very first 12-tone piece that he ever wrote, whose tone row provided the basis for the first movement of the lyric suite, was a song written in 1925. What's the text of that song? Again, Schließe mir die Augen beide. He takes the same lyric that he used to express his love for his wife all those years before and turns it into the basis for this new piece in which he's expressing love for another woman. The second version is utterly different from the first one. Instead of a wholesome melody, we now have the jagged intervallic leaps of a 12-note row. But the song is also unmistakably sensual, lingering, voluptuous, a lover's whispered proposition. Berg has succeeded in making 12-tone music sexy. It's quite staggering. The song is a real achievement. But you have to ask yourself, couldn't he have found another poem? One could hardly imagine a more blatant way of announcing that he had now transferred his affections from one woman to the next, as well as from one part of his life to another, and indeed one compositional system to another, then doing this. He took her song, one text, two settings, and a world of difference between them. We know that Berg was capable of a certain degree of cruelty, and to my mind at least, it's hard not to see this as a breathtakingly cruel gesture towards Hilan, or at the very least a sign of callous disregard. Perhaps this may even help to further explain the deeply negative feelings that Hilan harbored towards the lyric suite, feelings that some people, as you've seen, even theorize may have had a plausible connection with the circumstances of Berg's tragic passing. So in both the film and this talk, I've tried to paint Berg as a kind of master juggler of secrets, a composer of secrets, if you will. Now, why was he that way? Well, past a certain point, I think it's bound to be speculation. But one thing that's clear about Berg is that he found composing, to be quite difficult. His student, Adorno, said that Berg had to overcome an almost physical timidity and self-doubt in order to sit down and write music. And indeed, the number of completed Berg compositions is quite small. That's understandable, I think, because unlike other great composers who were child prodigies, Berg had no early training and only picked up composing in a more or less dilettantish fashion as a young man, as is noted in the film. Moreover, when he finally got himself a teacher, it was Arnold Schoenberg, one of the most formidable and searching musical intellects of the 20th century, who rarely missed an opportunity to berate his wealthy and handsome young pupil for his laziness and the technical shortcomings of his work. So it's probably not surprising that Berg sometimes needed a kind of shot in the arm in order to sit down and compose. Secrets, both artistic and personal, seem to have sometimes provided him that shot, a sense of invincibility perhaps, or even hidden rebellion, which helped him to do what only he could. Here's a photo of him in the last year of his life, composing his final opera, Lulu, which he never lived to finish. I'd like to direct your attention to the gold fountain pen that he's holding. That was a gift from Hannah, his lover, whom he rarely saw by that point. Hilan was under the false impression that the pen was given to him by Hannah's brother, Franz Werfel, the author and the third husband of Alma Mahler, another fascinating personality, who's the subject of my next film, Mahler in New York. But it was in fact from Hannah. Berg used that pen to write most of the violin concerto, as well as Lulu, which is an opera about forbidden, self-destructive, and ultimately fatal passion. Berg wrote to Hannah, "When I work and take hold of your pen, at that moment I am here and I'm also with you, as I am with myself when I am with you in thought." Whatever we may think of the way he got there, or of Berg's personal character, I think I speak for anyone who has ever fallen in love with the lustrously dark depths of his music when I say, thank heavens Berg picked up that pen and used it for what it was always intended for, creation. Thank you very much.